When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to the blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Within the gaming world, there are your general gamers, but then there are those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming. If you're one of those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming, we certainly got the place to send you. Scorpion Lair Games. That's right, Scorpion Lair Games is the creators of the true crime hit Killers, the card game. Let's not forget they also have Killers Clothing Company, their profiler game, and things like the 5-Minute Murder channel on YouTube. And we certainly can't forget the new book that is certainly a hit, Beyond the Headliners, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends. Make sure you visit Jeff and the Scorpion Lair Games on Facebook and everywhere today.
This is Supermouth Dave Drayson. I'm listening to Crazy Train, the best in the world right now. Please. And if you're lucky, Supermouth will be back.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Obviously, our listeners know my fascination with wrestling history, but we're going to get into an interesting book tonight because this book studies the history of a particular company's belt over time, and that be the AWA from Minneapolis, obviously, for those who know the history. But the book is called It's All About the Belt. And this gentleman is calling in all the way from Australia. Libnan A, we'll call him. I don't want to butcher your name, sir. Or Lib, I should say. We will be calling you because of got the okay. But we are also joined by Mr. George Shire, who is the AWA historian of the show. So let's go ahead and enjoy the show. Lib, how are you doing, sir? Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and welcome the author of this great book, Mr. Lib. And by the way, since it is on AWA Title Histories, I also asked Mr. George Shire to come on back in because George not only wrote the foreword to the book, but he, being the AWA historian that he is, I know he can fill in some blanks as we go along the way here. But Lib, as George was just saying, congratulations on the book release. What's the response been so far?
Oh, it's been good. There's a lot of I put a few posts on Facebook, and people are talking about it, and that's what it's all about. You get people talking about it, and hopefully they'll purchase it.
And I should mention again, the title of the book is "It's All About the Belt." It's over 220 pages of thoroughly researched wrestling history of the AWA World Championship. George, I'll bring you in here too. Over the 30-year period, and I know Lib went into the book with this, how many changes of the belt would you say, the style of the belt, based on some of the pictures used for the book?
Well, I think probably we should let Lib address that type of a question, because
Okay.
I really want him to get all the credit here. This man worked hours, days, weeks, months, years to get this right. So I think he deserves to answer that question. But
Lib?
just to sub what you say, Jonathan, the AWA title belt was always very significant, and we had basically a handful of champions that held the title for a small handful of champions that held the belt for any length of serious time. And Vern Gagne protected it very closely. And to do a book on a title belt or a title belt in general, I think it's a novice idea, and it's one that I'm glad he did. So, Lib, you go ahead and talk about the different belts.
Yeah, thanks, George. Yeah, there were five heavyweight championship belts that were used by the AWA promotion from 1960 to 1989.
Right on. So obviously you are Australian born and bred. And so my curiosity goes with, why pick the AWA and that title belt when you could have discussed so much with the history from so many different places? Why was it this direction with the book?
Well, the main thing about it was the Inmate belt, which the one Nick Bockwinkel had made at the Colorado prison. That was the focus of the book, because the owner that owned it, a Japanese guy called Kanye, I'm friends with him, and he has the original belt. And to do a book on a belt or belts, you need to have photos so people can see what the belt looks like, so you can describe it and so forth. So that was the main focus. So I said, okay, I'll do a book on that Inmate belt. That was my first thing to do. And I'm a wrestling historian. My late father, Sheik Ayoub, was a wrestler. And my love for belts came because he had this nice championship belt that he wore when he won a version of the world title in 1962 in Lebanon. And that's where I got my passion for belts. I always, because my father's not here with me anymore, so it was something that I looked up to him, and when I was a kid, I loved the belt. So when I got older, I met a good friend of mine called Ken, and I started making replica wrestling belts, not as a business, just as a hobby. And that's how it started. So I said, well, I can do a book on the Inmate belt, but why don't I do the other belts as well? Because there were 5. And so what I did is I made replicas of the first one and the second one, and the other 2, the 86 and the 80, the later ones, I didn't have to make it because Dave Milliken, the famous belt maker, he had replicas of them, and he knew Reggie Park. So I said, well, that's good. So I did it on all the 5 belts. But the main focus of the book is that Inmate belt, because that's the most talked about, because it was made in a prison.
Now, I would add something.
Sorry, George, go ahead.
I would add something to that regarding the Inmate belt, or the Inmate belt. Jeez, get my tongue tangled up there. The Inmate belt, it was unique because, as you just stated, the general consensus for title belts back in the day, they were always created by just a small group of people in the business. Reggie Parks being one of them, as an originator of them. And another guy was Nikita Malkovich in the 60s. He made quite a few belts for different wrestling territories, promotions. And so generally when a promoter, they needed a new belt or they wanted a new belt, in the 60s, after about 1965, Reggie Parks or Nikita got the call. Usually Reggie, though, for Vern Gagne in the AWA. And as a side note, I want to share something that, because it was funny after the fact, Vern had contacted Reggie to create in the 1984 era. He contacted Reggie to make a couple of new tag team belts. And Reggie said, fine, no problem. They agreed on a price. Reggie did the belts. The belts were going to be presented to the Road Warriors. And Reggie had made the previous belts that were worn by Bockwinkel and Stevens, Cortez and Bastien, Crusher and Bastien, the Vachon brothers, Lanza and Duncombe, Ventura and Adonis, the High Flyers. All of those teams held the belts that were before the 1984 belts. The funny part of the story is that when Vern got the tag team belts, he called up Reggie Parks and he yelled at him. He said, "What the hell did you do here? You got American Wrestling Alliance on the belt." And Reggie said, "Well, that's what it is." "No, it's never been Alliance," he says to Reggie. And the fact is, Reggie was correct. Originally, until about 1970, 71, it was the American Wrestling Alliance. And that's when Reggie worked for Vern as a wrestler all those years. And he just went ahead and put the Alliance on there instead of association. And so we had these funny belts that they looked great. They're beautiful, the ones the Road Warriors started with. But they were wrong in saying AWA and then American Wrestling Alliance under them. So with the Inmate belt, Lib is correct. There's a fun story with that because it was one of the rare times when a belt wasn't made by a belt maker. It had a strange beginning.
Since that's the main focus of the book, and everybody, I just want the audience to know that we will have a link to the Amazon page to purchase your book and all that fun stuff. And I think there'll be a way to get a hold of Lib if you want to buy directly from him to sign the book, etc. But we'll get to all that. Lib, since you mentioned about the famous Inmate belt, do you want to tell the story that George just referenced as far as making that belt and the history behind it a little bit?
Yeah, George knows all about the belt. He's the AWA historian. But the Inmate belt itself, the good thing about doing research on a book is to find new information that people don't know. And especially with that belt, a lot of people thought there was two belts when it first started. There was the one with the tan suede on the front, and there was a black one, the black one with on the top, and everyone thought that there was two belts, but there wasn't. There was one belt, and it didn't start with the tan belt. It just started with the black piece of leather, and then Reggie Parks put on a tan suede piece, and then it went back to that got all dirty and had to be changed again a few years later. One or 2 years later, and then the black, it came back to black, and that's how the belt stayed.
Well, Lib, I'm curious to know when it comes to, because there's a certain technique when making belts, and there's a certain artistry, I guess you would say, when creating a belt. And I know it's a completely different era now. I know AEW and WWE are heavily involved with the design and the detail and stuff like that. But with these AWA belts back in the day, if Vern called a Reggie Parks or whoever he wanted to do his belts, was he hands-on in the design, or was, hey, I hired this guy to make the belt, I leave it to them?
Vern with Reggie. Reggie did the design. Vern, after the Inmate belt got retired, another belt was made, and the second belt, which is, I call it the Police Gazette belt, because it was the belt that Vern was presented to in 1951 for the best wrestler of the year from the Police Gazette newspaper magazine, and he used that belt for his promotion. So Vern liked that style of belt, and he said to Reggie, "Can you make that belt in that sort of style?" And that's what Reggie did. So if you look at the original Police Gazette belt, the one that Gagne used in his promotion from 1965, 66, and you look at the 86 belt, it looks very, not similar. It looks similar but it's made differently. But that's where Reggie got the design off.
You know, one of the things too, Jonathan and Lib, you know, you'll relate to this. I think it's interesting to say that the Reggie Parks coming up with a title belt and getting into that business was totally by accident. Reggie was teamed up with Doug Gilbert in the AWA Omaha territory in 1965-66, and they became Midwest Tag Team Champions, which was just an Omaha and Nebraska version of the title that Joe Dusick, the promoter, carried in his territory. And he worked for the AWA, of course, but he recognized the Midwest Tag Team Championship, and he puts the title on Reggie and Doug Gilbert, and there were no title belts. And Reggie had actually asked Joe Dusick, he says, you know, how come we don't have belts? We're champions. We should be signified by championship belts. And Dusick told him, I don't have money for title belts, you know, and that was kind of the story. So Reggie took it upon himself to make two belts with Midwest Tag Team Championship on them. And he and Doug Gilbert were the first two to wear those belts. And that's how it all started, just by accident. And Reggie started doing belts, you know, basically for a living and for promotions all over the country out of that little incident.
Interesting. I didn't know it started as simple as that. But obviously, we are talking the era of the territories and stuff. And Lib, I'm curious to know, how much American wrestling did you guys get over there in Australia? Because Australia is just so far away. Especially, it wasn't like today where we have streaming platforms and cable and all the technology we have. So how much outside entertainment did you get as far as the business goes?
Well, in Australia, we had the World Championship Wrestling promotion, which was run by Jim Barnett and Johnny Doyle from 64 to 1978. Barnett left in 73 and it was sold to Tony Coloni. And we had it from 64 to 78. But other than having the US, watching US wrestling, we used to have maybe in the 50s, Hollywood wrestling from Hollywood, you know, a couple of tapes here and there. But it wasn't until like 85 when the start of WrestleMania that came, you know, through on TV and we all started watching it.
Well, one of the things about Australia is that all of the American guys, or a lot of the American guys, did a lot of traveling over there when Barnett and Doyle were the promoters. In the later 60s into the 70s, it wasn't unusual for guys like Ray Stevens, Nick Bockwinkel, Dominic DiNucci, Spiros Arion, Red Bastien, Nick Bockwinkel, I think I mentioned. Just a ton of the American guys would go over there and tour. And I think it would had to have been fun to be a fan there, to see all these American guys come in. And a lot of them got huge pushes. Race and Hennig were over there for a while. And just, you know, most Americans were there. And it's kind of on a lower scale than what Japanese wrestling was, where the American guys would make regular tours over to Japan. But Australia had just a great heritage for American wrestlers.
Right on. Well, what I was going to mention, since Lib mentioned World Championship Wrestling in Australia, he actually was involved with a documentary, Over the Top Rope, which is 10 years to make this comprehensive documentary about WCW in Australia. It charts events, the extraordinary characters, and everything that mesmerized the nation from 65-ish to 78. So, and you mentioned earlier, besides putting a documentary together, you grew up the son of a wrestler. So, did that make it more interesting to put a documentary together? Or can you talk about the documentary, obviously, but also growing up in the business?
Well, unfortunately, my dad passed away when I was 11. So I really didn't get to, I only saw him a few times when he wrestled for the World Championship Wrestling promotion against Killer Carl Cox and Bulldog Brower and Bob Roop and those guys. But it wasn't until later on when I grew up I understood how famous, well, not really famous, but what a legend my dad was and what he did for the business. He never wrestled in the States. He was wrestling in Europe and Asia. That's where he wrestled. And then because I really didn't get to know him, I started asking about him and finding about. Then I started learning about wrestling and the history and all that. And then I decided to do a documentary because all the wrestlers that knew my dad respected him, and I always rang them up and said, "Look, I'm thinking of doing a documentary about the wrestling." He goes, "Yeah, come do an interview." So that's how it all started, and it takes a long time to do a documentary. It's a lot of work. Same as a book for me, anyway. Because when I do something, I want to do it properly. I don't want to do it, half cocked. I want to do it properly. So how long it takes. But as long as it comes out and is presentable, and I'm happy with it, and that's the main thing. That's the same with it's all about the belt book.
I want to cut in here, and I want to cut in here and say something too now, because Lib just brought up a beautiful point, and this is why I'm extremely proud of him getting this book done. He said he wants to do it right, and he wants to make sure that everything's accurate. And then to do those things, and having done books myself, I realized how hard a task that can be, how challenging it can be, how frustrating it can be, how just when you think you got it, something else you got to come up with or change or work on or correct. And I just need to say this about Lib. I'm going to say this right up front. Anybody that wants to consider or should consider getting this book, it's all about the belt. You've got a book in your hand. I don't have a copy yet, but I know you've got a book in your hand that a man put a lot of himself and his time and energy into. And I can tell you personally, many times, and I know we're on different days here, I think, with Australia and Minnesota, where I'm at, but there were many times when Lib and I were communicating via text messages or private messages. And sometimes we'd go over the same thing over and over again just to make sure that it was right. And then we'd want to clarify it, or Lib he'd apologize to me. "I'm sorry, I have to ask this again," or "I need clarification." And I have nothing but and I'll admit, sometimes I got a little frustrated. It's like, oh my God, we covered this. But I loved it because the man is so dedicated. And that's the kind of book you're going to get a good book out of. And so that's my endorsement on that end. That anybody listening to this, if you want to get a different type of wrestling book, this isn't about a wrestler. This isn't about tag teams. This isn't about the business in general. It's a book about a belt and a series of belts. And the story behind them that we'll continue to talk about is something that Lib just put his heart and soul into. And I can't be prouder. I just want you to know that.
Thanks, George.
And that's actually what I was going to bring up, that because me and George were talking for a few minutes prior to you logging in, and he was just pretty much what he just said, that you guys would communicate, you'd ask some questions, George would answer, and you make sure everything was as accurate as possible with the information, which bravo, because I have a bunch of books behind me. They're good books, especially like autobiographies and stuff, that it's like, that's a little off, or that's the history nerd in me go, You know what I mean? Because everybody has different perspectives on things that went on. So putting the book together, how influential was George? Was he your only historian you talked to, or was there a few different people you were speaking with?
There was George, and thank you for the kind words, George. And he was right. I would ask him. I would ask him the same question. I'll ask him a question, and then 5 months later, I'll ask him the same question. Because for me, I've got to understand. If I don't understand what George is telling me, I can't write it down in the way I want to write it. So I have to ask him. Sometimes I've asked him 3-4 times, and yeah, he did get frustrated a few times. I said, George, I've got to ask. I have to know if I understand what you're saying, then I can write it in my book, and then people will understand it. Well, there was George Shire, Joyce Pustain, she's another lovely friend of mine.
Yes, Joyce is an angel. She's a
yeah,
sweetheart. Very nice.
She has a wonderful book too, by the way.
Yes,
so.
that's right. And yeah, she was good. I'd ask her so many questions, and one of the actually with Joyce, it was funny. I never met her, and I just heard about that she's got some photos that she took. I'm going, I wonder if she's got any pictures of the AWA belt. So I texted her, and she got back to me. She goes, look, I'd love to help, and straight away I knew what a nice person. She never met me, doesn't know who I am, and she was willing to help me. And the good thing about Joyce is one of the first photos that she took of the belt that Nick Bockwinkel wore, the Inmate belt, it's just black leather. And everyone thought that there was 2 pieces of leather on it, another black piece on top. But it wasn't. It was only 1 piece of black leather. And I said to Joyce, this picture, this can't be 1977, because this is the first time I saw the belt on a plain piece of black leather. And I said, do you know the dates? And she gave me all the dates. Then I worked it out that the belt actually came out with black leather. Then it was changed to tan, and another piece was put on with the tan, and then it was taken off. So there's Joyce, and of course Dave Milliken. He worked closely with Reggie Parks, especially with the 1986 belt and the 89 belt, and his knowledge of the belts and what Reggie said to him and what Reggie said to Vern. It's all in the book. And that was, to me, that information there is coming from a person that knew Reggie was really invaluable. And with Reggie, like, even though he didn't actually physically, because he's not here anymore, he didn't actually help me with the book, but I owed him a little paragraph in the back of the book, because any belt person that does a book has to, give credit to Reggie Parks for what he did, to create this belt business.
Absolutely. Because that's a neat, and there's other Reggie Parks stories I've heard of, non-belt wise. They're hilarious, but now it's not the time or the place to tell those stories. Yeah. But how would you describe, being that you are also a fan as well down under, what would you say the biggest style difference is between what we see, say, coming from the States, or like you said, your dad wrestled in Europe and Asia and stuff? How would you describe the Australian style? Because obviously most people, the younger listeners who will listen to this, think of Buddy Matthews and AEW or Rhea Ripley, who are from Australia. So how would you describe how you guys present the product?
Are you talking about like 2025 to America now, or are you talking about?
Or you can talk about the evolution, I should say, of how the presentation is done.
Yeah, look, I don't really like the presentation now. It's not my style. To me, it's wrestling. It's pitting yourself against another wrestler, making the match look good. It's talking now. It's just, I just don't like it. In my dad's day, you learn 50 holds. You learn how to wrestle. You learn how to entertain the crowd, and you can go anywhere in the world and lock up with someone, and you can do a match. If I was a wrestler here in Australia and go over to America now and start wrestling, there wouldn't be a match, because it's just totally different styles, the way people train.
You know, Jonathan, one of the things that I think is important when you're trying to compare the eras, and I'm with Lib, I don't watch today's product pretty much at all anymore. I've just removed myself from it. But I always believe that every generation has their time, and the folks that are loving today's business, you know, that's great. They deserve to get their fun and enjoy it. But the old wrestling, it was unique in the sense that just here alone in the United States, and people have heard us talk about this, we had like 25 individual territories around the country where each wrestler, each promotion would have their group of mainstays and bring in talent, and talent would rotate itself. And the guys always had a place to go. The wrestlers always had a place to go. When they got old, or their shtick or gimmick got stale in one territory, they could move on to another one and either create a new character or pick up where they left off and make money. And the reason it worked so well was that up until about 20 years ago, we didn't have internet and all this stuff that's instantaneous where we can find things out. And these guys could go, and everything was, as the old kayfabe word, they could do things that nobody could know about. They made it real. They wrestled. They would go to their graves before they would tell you the matches were prearranged or the finishes were prearranged. And the guys had a camaraderie to each other. When you mention guys like Red Bastien and Ray Stevens and Mad Dog Vachon and just tons and tons and tons of guys, they loved each other. They were enemies in the ring at times. They were foes in the ring, involved in angles and programs that supposedly they wanted to eliminate one another. But outside the ring, they were family. They loved each other, and they took care of each other. And the other side of it is that because they were trained so well for the business by guys like Vern Gagne and Eddie Graham and Boris Malenko and Stu Hart and Hiro Matsuda and so many of the other great trainers of that era, they were able to know the business, work the business, make every match look as real as possible. And today's business is just more entertainment and a lot of noise and fireworks. And again, it goes over today, and that's great. But I think I feel very blessed because I had an opportunity to grow up when it was, as I always say, real.
Mm-hmm. Lib, I obviously with this book, I'm sure you went in depth of the famous Stan Hansen belt story. So what belt would you say he had of the 5 different belts that you covered over the 30-year period?
Are you talking about what belt Stan Hansen had, or the story?
Yeah, which belt was it when he had that famous run it over, all that?
That was the Inmate belt.
Was it?
That was the Inmate belt. Yeah. The Inmate belt was the one.
Go ahead.
There's such an interesting story about that, and Stan Hansen, Scott Teal printed a book covering Stan Hansen's bio, etc. And it's a really good account of Stan's career. And they talk about that incident. The long story short, and I really hope that stuff like that is, going to be more interesting when they read it in the All About the Belt. But it was the Inmate belt. Stan took it, left the building in Denver when he refused to drop the title to Nick. When asked to, he was going to Japan. And there's so many stories about who was right, who was wrong. Was Vern wrong? Was Stan wrong? Was either of them right? The bottom line is that the property that Stan took was Vern's belt, period. And it wasn't his to take. And when he decided to return it, I've talked with Greg Gagne a number of times over the years, and Greg said that there was actually litigation going on. Stan had to be contacted through an attorney to get the belt back to him because he didn't want to return it. And of course, when he did, Vern got the belt back with a big old truck indentation in it. He had driven over it with his pickup truck, and he sent it back to Vern with a comment, "Here's your effing belt." And it's too funny when you think about it in hindsight. That's so childish. But on the other hand, I've had a chance later on to talk with Stan Hansen about that very incident and what a mellow, nice guy he is in reality. And he said, God, that was such a crazy incident. He says, and I shouldn't have done what I did. And but it's all, they go through this in the heat of passion and do these things. But that was the story with the Inmate belt. And that particular belt, how it even came about. And I'm going to let Lib address this, because when Nick Bockwinkel, and guess what, folks, in a little over a month, on November 8th, it's going to be 50 years since Nick Bockwinkel won Vern Gagne's AWA title for the first time. And he went on to hold it for pretty close to 5 years, uninterrupted. But it's coming up on 50 years on November 8th. And Lib, I know you know this, maybe you'll just want to touch on it a little bit. When he became champ, he didn't have a belt.
No, that's right. There was no belt.
And probably save the story for why there wasn't in the book in detail, but the long story short, and then there's a great story that goes around it. Vern's title belt had been stolen in Joyce Postion's city, Davenport, Iowa, in July of 75. And so you've covered that in the book, I'm guessing, and that's great.
Yes, that's the whole Inmate Police Gazette transfer to the Inmate belt is a great story. I even managed to dig up the old police reports from that time where they when the belt was stolen until the person was incarcerated, then released. So there's a whole chapter on that, and I've got a great story from Joyce Postain, because she was actually at that match when the belt was stolen. And going back to what you're saying about Stan Hansen and the Inmate belt, well, like, you hear the stories, and wrestlers always like to overindulge when they're telling a story.
No way.
Oh, shocker.
No, they like to indulge a bit. But I can say that when Stan Hansen took the belt and took it to Japan and then came back, and then Vern asked for the belt by an attorney, when the belt came back, it was in a bad state when Stan had it, when he left with it. But when the belt came back, there wasn't really that much difference. Yeah, there was a slight difference in the plates. Yeah, it looks like something's run over it. Yeah. Nick Bockwinkel said, yeah, there was tire marks over it. But look, I can't. As a person that's doing the research, I only can say what I see and what I hear. And it didn't really do that much damage to it. The belt was already damaged. It was in a very, very bad state. That's why Vern didn't reuse the belt. He didn't want to spend the money to reuse the belt, to spend any money on it. And then they got another belt made, and then Vern gave the belt to Nick as a thank you for his services to the AWA promotion.
And that particular belt, when Vern gave it back to Nick, and Nick wasn't champ anymore, he gave it to Nick as just a gift. Nick carried that belt around with him to Cauliflower Alley, etc., and he'd have it on display. And Lib is correct. It wasn't like it was completely mangled or anything, but there was a legit indentation where you could see a tire or something had went over it. But again, after 5 years, this would have been about 4.5 years, I guess. No, it would have been more than that. Goodness sakes, this was in the 80s. By the time that Stan got the belt had been around for 10 years, and it had a lot of damage to it, being thrown around in matches. And, sometimes it was used as a foreign object against an opponent by, Bobby Heenan or somebody. And so, yeah, it was banged up, probably well due for a new one. But the stealing or taking the belt to Japan and everything is a funny story. And when you read the book, I think you'll probably realize that both Vern and Stan had legitimate arguments for why it turned out the way it did. You make your own point. You make your own judgment at this point, which of them was right or wrong. I have always sided more with Vern, only because he was the boss and the owner of the company and the belt. So, but I can certainly see Stan's point.
Absolutely. Lib, what would you say with all the research and everything you did in prepping this book together? And like I said before, going to have the Amazon link for people to go purchase both hardcover and paper as well. Was there something that really stood out to you that you may not have known, that you go, wow, that's an interesting look on things, or a take, or however you want to look at it?
Yeah, there was a couple of things. One, as I just discussed before, about the black leather, one piece of black leather when Nick first had the belt. I never knew that. I thought it always came with the second piece on top with the tan suede on it. So that was one. And that's why I told you before when I talked to Joyce, I go, are you sure that these photos, what's the date of these photos? I've got to know the dates. And because she is so meticulous with her collection, she dated everything. So I knew exactly when he had that belt on the night, and then I can do the history of it. And the other thing with the Inmate belt, because my friend Kanye owns that actual belt, he sent me all the photos of it. So I can see, the one was for the book, and there's a couple of engraving, I'm not going to go into it, but there's a couple of engraving stuff on the belt which no one knows about. That's I didn't even know. I looked at the belt hundreds of times with the photos, but I didn't see this thing that was on the belt. And it's I don't know, I don't want to get too much, but yeah, it's that was a big surprise.
Well, what would you say? Because, like I said, you had two big. Try this in English. You've had two pretty big projects in the documentary and the book. What do you see yourself working on next, and is it going to be wrestling related?
Well, actually, I did my first book in '98. I forgot to mention that. It was called 100 Years of Australian Professional Wrestling. So I did that book well before the internet came out or anything like that. I used to go to the library and spend, I think it was nearly a whole year going through the library to the newspapers to get information. That was my first book. Then I did the documentary, and then I did this. It's all about the belt. Well, look, I've made a lot of replica belts, so I have a lot of belt books that I want to do, specific ones, because look, for me, if you can see the actual belt, it's fantastic. If you haven't got the original belt and you've got a good replica, then you can see how the actual belt is. Pictures don't do it justice. Like you'll see in my book, my replicas that I made, you can see the actual belt, the physical belt, even though it's not the original, but it looks exactly the same. And that's one thing that I'd like to do. Is other books. I want to do a book on the WCW in Australia. It'd be like a bio book of each wrestler that came. There was like 600 wrestlers that appeared on WCW between that time. So it'd be like a stat sort of book. And my dad wrestled in India a lot. And India was huge. There was like 80,000 people used to come to the wrestling matches. In 1953, 54, they had these big tournaments. So I like to do a book on that because I've got all the information, because my dad wrestled there and I talked to a lot of people about it. And I want to redo my 100 Years of Australian Professional Wrestling book. Now, because of online newspapers, you can be the historian straight away. You can look up stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that I obviously go into a library and flicking through newspapers compared to, punching in wrestling and getting all the information. I can add a lot to my book, especially in the beginning, in the 1800s. I can add a lot to that. So I'm going to revamp that book, bring it up to the year 2025, put the information, add the other information, change the book how it looks, because at 98 was, it was good for 98, but 2025, it's going to look much better. And I've got a lot of, I'm an historian. I've got a database with matches and wrestlers. It's just, it's really hard, Jonathan, for one person, I've got a passion for it. It's never about the money. I just do it because I love it. If I can do a book and get it out there, that's what I want to do. And if one copy sells, great. 100 copies sells, great. There's no difference to me. I've got a passion. I've got a passion for wrestling history.
And I'd like to echo that 110%, because everything, Lib, you just said, I live, I feel. It's all about getting the history out there. It's about sharing what happened, how it happened, when it happened, and make sure it's correct, and educate the people that want to know. I love fans today that are in their 40s or their 30s, and they want to know about wrestling from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Oh my gosh. I would spend all my time, if I had unlimited time, with these folks, because I want to share. And anytime you do any of this work, books or whatever it is, it's just a labor of love. And I mean, I wake up every day and that's what I want to do. I not only want to, and I do every day, work on something wrestling related. I'm always researching. I'm always looking for new things, titles, histories, results, you name it. And so it's a personal satisfaction. And if I ever tried to write a book to get rich, or do any of this to get rich, well, somehow I missed the boat on that, because you don't get rich doing them. You just hope that, like Lib says, if there's a few copies that are sold and somebody gets educated, that's great. And through the last few years on my own books, I've given more away than I've sold. When I've given them to somebody, it's because that person, they're book worthy, they're history worthy, and I want them to learn. So I applaud you for that too. And I just do a book, I want to make $1 million. Well, that'd be great. But I think that there's a lot of satisfaction in seeing your work done.
Yeah.
And know that you're sharing something with a generation that couldn't live it because they weren't here or old enough.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, if one person enjoys it, I'm happy.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Well, I know you, and I'm saying this jokingly because of what Lib said to me, that he's not the most tech savvy, but if folks want to try to track you down or see the documentary or click on the Amazon link to get the book, where can they find you?
My website, www.overthetoprope.com.au.
Right on. Lib, George, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Thanks, George. Nice seeing you again.
Great seeing you, and I do sincerely hope you do sell 1 million copies.
Thanks, George.
I appreciate you. Jonathan, thanks for having us.
Hey folks, looking for the ultimate destination for the nerd enthusiasts and collectors? Well, we found the spot for you. Nerds Nest Collectibles is a haven for nerds, geeks, and fans alike, as they have many different products and certainly more to come. Make sure you go ahead and visit them at nerdsnestcollectibles.com. Check them out.
And this show rocks. It's hardcore. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.